Hello, I'm Andrew, and I am a full time voice actor. I have been doing this for the last year, and I remember day one as I came into this with absolutely no visual in my mind of where the steps I was going to be taking. I knew where I wanted to go. So there were some tangible steps I took at the very beginning, including getting in some vocal practices, getting in some warm ups, building my booth. And honestly, as I've been doing all of these things, every step of the way, I have just been winging it. Let's talk about that. I'm just kind of winging it. All right. So when I first got into this at the very beginning, like I said, I didn't know what steps I should take first. I knew there was a whole lot of options. I'm like, do I just start telling people, hey, I've got this charming voice? And uh, I started digesting a lot from podcasts to YouTube videos to just talking to people. And I've talked about that in the past. But one of the things that I would say, or some of the things that I did at the very beginning of this or knew I needed to do were just huge and I think are worth talking about. First and foremost, I knew I needed a good recording space. When I say I was winging this in creating my space, I am not kidding. A friend of mine who I had been talking to about all this and like I'm wanting to read audiobooks. Genuinely, at the beginning of this, I thought I was just going to read audiobooks. I have since yes, I would still do audiobooks, but there's a lot more to that I still don't understand. So I know I've got a lot to learn before I take that route personally. However, I thought I was just going to do audiobooks. I thought I was just going to read these things. I love stories so much. So a friend of mine had what is it? Those big thick mattress foams. He had one that he's had for a while. He is a graphic designer. Um very artistic, and he had created this because he would be creating his own type of booth for his work that he does professionally. He never ended up using that, and he actually has a nice space for what he needs to get done already. But he gave me that mattress foam, and dope. I'm going to use this. I've seen videos, I've seen YouTubes and TikToks. It's just throwing up foam on the wall, right? If I do that, boom, I've got a vocal booth. So I took this mattress foam and I cut it every which way for these. I At the time I was living in an apartment in the city, and we had this one interior closet, and I thought that's going to be where my booth is. It was our laundry room slash sort of place, and it's also where our electric junction box and everything. It was a small room. I lived in a very small apartment there with my wife, and I cut this foam up and just started like duct taping it almost to the walls. We couldn't officially hang things there. So I just put it up in a few spots and I was like, there we go. I have a booth now. And as you can imagine, it wasn't a good booth. I might link I when I first did it, I made a little TikTok of like, I made my booth. Oh my god, look, it's starting. And I was so excited. I look back at it now and realize like, oh my gosh. Yeah, there was some more work that needed to be done to that friend. It sounded at the time, I thought it sounded so much better. And realistically, it did sound better than just being, computer microphone to me. But my wife, who was so excited for me, and again, I've said this multiple times or so many times outside of this podcast, but I know I've said it here in the podcast. She has been so supportive, and good God, support is so needed to pursue any type of creative pursuit like this. And she has been just so great for that. But she bought me a like starter kit that came with the interface and the microphone. So already I felt like I had a huge leg up. Um, I had had the Yeti microphone to begin with, and I thought I'd be getting started with that. But my wife surprised me on my last day in my last job to give me this microphone that I could use to start this thing. And I threw this foam up on the wall. I hooked up my little microphone on a little stationary stand on like a standing like shelving system that we put in there, and I threw in a computer, like a little laptop, and I was like, I've got it. I've done it. And it sounded very much like me standing in a closet, that boxy noise. I thought it sounded incredible, but it was not the thing. I researched more. I found YouTube videos. I started watching a lot more content of how I can do these things. And I started seeing a lot of things about like moving blankets being the thing. And for the I put throw these podcast episodes up on YouTube. You could probably see behind me. I have moving blankets still. These are the to historic things. These were my very first moving blankets that I got for this entire voiceover thing, and they've evolved to how they're positioned around me. Um, but I don't know if y'all know this yet. These don't stop sound. They're not soundproof. In fact, unless you want to do some hardcore construction, if you don't already have a soundproof room, there's no way to soundproof the room that you're in. There's construction that has to go with that. And which is, I think, a very common thing based on how much I find in blogs and other things, didn't fully appreciate the difference between soundproofing and sound treating. I thought it was a bit pedantic and didn't realize that it was as important or as different as it was, I should say. Uh, this room I'm in right now is a lot differently treated than that first closet. And yet, there's still more I want to do in this space. This is not its final iteration. This is just where it's at right now. And honestly, it's pretty dang good sound. You can get really good sound with sound treatment, bookable sound with sound treatment, and it can only go up from there. So for me, like I'm in a place where I'm happy with my sound quality in here, and I am still aiming for better. Anyway, I digress there. I threw these foam things up in that first booth and did not work. So researching more, I got the moving blankets and some PVC pipe, and I built a little PVC skeletal thing and then threw the moving blankets over there. And honestly, it did sound so much better. It really did. And like I said, I was going through Edge Studio and I sent off my audio to them to get some information. And they said, you sound, that's good. I can work with that. They have an engineer there who produces the thing. So here's something that I would kind of advise to you to really consider before you pay for something like Edge Studio. Something I didn't do that I would encourage you to really consider if you're listening to this and trying to pick up anything I've learned. They gave me a pass on that booth. When I go back and listen to recordings from back then, they did not sound good. The only reason that booth passed, in my opinion, and I could be completely wrong here, is they have great engineers who could do the heavy leg lift of creating that sound to make it sound like it was actually a good space. Those were not. I was not in a good space. The sound was not quality. I had picked up a new microphone. To kind of give context to that, my wife had gotten me that little kit. It came with a microphone, but after really learning more about microphones, after finally doing the research around those, I realized I this microphone that came with the initial kit I got was really I could do better. I wanted to do better. So in my own way, I didn't feel like it was good enough, so I wanted to do more. I wound up driving, and this is phenomenal, honestly. This is not a commercial for them, but I guess it kind of is. They're not sponsoring anything. You guys know this is not a sponsored podcast right now. And I loved Sweetwater. My wife actually got me that kit through Sweetwater, and they were so kind, so nice. They sent us candy, like all that stuff. We actually were driving past, or had to drive, we were on a road trip past there. their actual physical location. I think it's in Indiana. We were driving past there, and I wanted to peek in, and I also wanted to get a better microphone than what I had. I had had this initial kit for probably about 2, maybe 3 months at that time, but I contacted them and said, "Hey, I'm wanting a new microphone. I'm wanting one. Would you guys let me return this and exchange it out?" And they said yes. They took back the microphone that I had been using and learning and trying out on, and they took it back. And they sold me, I got my own little Focusrite interface, Focusrite Scarlett Solo interface. I then got myself a Sennheiser MK4 because I heard so many great things about it from an engineer who was doing a class I took through Edge Studio, and I suddenly had a new mic. I had a new interface. I had gone to Sweetwater, and they accepted a return that. Honestly, I was blown away that they accepted this return and exchanged it out for me. Um, I came back to my booth. I have the moving blankets up, and the sound quality was significantly and noticeably better, but it was not the type of quality that would make it easy for an engineer to work with. And I can fully acknowledge that now. All this is to say, like, at the very beginning of this, building my booth was the first thing I was winging it on. But at the time, me thought that booth sounded phenomenal and incredible. And there are so many ways where it's like I can look back and say I would do it differently. And yet, I don't know that everybody agrees with what I'm about to say here, but I do because it was my experience in it. I booked m- only one job so far that I've actually booked, to be honest. Like, I booked a job off of that studio, and it became a radio promo. It went out. I felt so freaking good about that. Um, but when I listened to that actual promo, I can still hear some of the quality misses. And again, I overanalyze. I'm going to be my worst critic always. But rather than looking at that and saying like, "Oh, I should be bummed about that." Like, I look at that as an opportunity for me to continue to aim for and do better. So, yeah. I didn't want to just talk about my booth. Honestly, I didn't even come in here thinking I would talk about the booth process. But when I think of the concept of I'm just winging it, that was the first thing I was winging it on when it came to like the actual how to of this. There are so many good resources out there for interfaces, for microphones, for how to treat your space. But I'll tell you, what matters most is what you can afford and how your voice and what space you're using interact with each other. You can get 1,000 tips from a YouTube video or a podcast or a blog post or even this podcast if you want. I don't know why you would, but whatever. But none of that's going to tell you how you sound on what microphone with what interface or USB or XLR or whatever. Like, all the researching you can do isn't going to replace the fact that you just got to play around with the things and figure out what works best for you, how to deaden the sound in the right ways or how to soundproof in the right ways. Like, there's each person has a unique situation, and I it's overwhelming sometimes, and I feel overwhelmed when I think about it. um in this particular booth I'm standing in, this is booth 2.0 because my wife and I moved. We actually had the amazing opportunity to buy a home, and we purchased this home because it had a weird room in it that I was like, that could be my studio. And we went for it, and we got this, and we were so excited, so pleased with what we were able to accomplish here, and know that it is incredibly privileged that we had the opportunity to buy a house, especially in the market blow up and weirdness that kind of has gone on over the last year. Not talking about that though. I built the acoustic panels that I have in here. I re put up my moving blankets with a new PVC skeleton iteration in here, and it's taken a lot of work. And I still want to get my sound better, but even now, I think where I'm kind of going with this portion is that I'm always gonna feel like I'm winging it. Um, and I'm sure I'm hoping in no, I'm not hoping for this, but I'm anticipating that in a year's time, I'm gonna look at this iteration of this studio and say, "This sounds terrible. I wish I would have done XYZ." Um, but yeah, like in the interest of just keep moving forward, the booth was something I did need. I would argue personally that if you want to go forward in this industry, you need a booth of some sort, whatever that may be. And it needs to have enough sound isolation things in there that will treat it well and treat it right. And you can do a lot of things. Maybe you're wanting to do just small projects. Cool. Maybe you're wanting to do really big projects. Great. Like, whatever that may be, your unique situation is yours. And you treat the space, you get the equipment, you do the stuff, so it reflects you. Something I wanted to make sure I said and called out. When I say I was winging it, it's also because I didn't start this thing and like I didn't have a bunch of money in the bank that I could go and get professional consultation, professional training, professional somebody come in and do like one-on-one anything. Everything I was finding, rightfully so, because these are people who are talented in their craft. I can't afford that. I couldn't afford that. So I've had to figure it out on a budget that worked for me. If you can afford that and you want to do that, you could find people who will do one-on-one consults who can fast track that process for you. I just realized as I was listening through my first recording of everything, I wanted to make sure I pointed that out. That I'm not saying it's I'm not saying there aren't options that exist out there. I know there are options that exist out there for somebody to come in and take care of the startups for you, like the startup process, and can make it a lot quicker. I didn't have that opportunity. And yeah, this was me figuring it out. I think I came into this with an assumption that that was already on the table, but I wanted to call it out too. This is me winging it without financial backing. That like I did have a good amount of financial backing at the beginning, but it wasn't a lot. It was enough to do the things I've talked about so far. And after booking the job, obviously that paid, or I'll let you know it paid, and that was able to get me a little bit further. And I have done lots of odd jobs here and there, so I've been able to afford a little bit more and a little bit more. But it's not fast. A year in, and I'm still wheels spinning, moving forward as best I can. Just wanted to call that out. Yeah, I tend to get to this point where I'm starting to ramble and I can't remember where I was going and what I started at, what I'm going to finish at. So, like I said before, I just start talking, and where we end is a surprise to all of us. I'm going to talk more, I think, next time about the things I intended to come in here to talk about, which is how I decided to train myself, my vocal process as I was learning how I should use my voice, and all that going forward. But I guess I started today with the booth, and we great. I'll probably back in here soon, but cheers.